Developing Yourself and Others by 9 Dots Development, Conflict in the Workplace with Jane Shaw.
Hello and welcome to this 9 Dots Development discussion around conflict in the workplace. So my name's Jane Shaw and I'm an associate trainer to 9 Dots, and I work in and around learning and development, specialising in leadership and coaching and emotional intelligence. I hold a postgrad diploma in coaching psychology, and I'm currently doing my MSc in business psychology. 9 Dots have sent me over a couple of questions that they've asked me to discuss with you. And the first one that they have sent me is about, where does conflict come from? And essentially, I think a dictionary definition is really helpful here. Conflict is basically an active disagreement between two people. And I think that's the fundamental core, isn't it? Conflict is this idea of disagreement. I disagree. Now, I may actively disagree, as in, I'm going to tell you I disagree with you, or I might inwardly be thinking, I don't agree with that. And in some way, this triggers a response or a sense of discomfort. And the topics that we can have disagreements on can be mild, as in, I wouldn't do it that way. It could be task related. And then it can get very personal in terms of our values and beliefs and the way that we feel things should be done. But essentially, conflict is this element of disagreement. So when I explain it like that, it seems quite rational and reasonable to expect conflict to occur in our working lives. But there is, and this is the next question that 9 Dots have positioned, is, well, why is there a negative stigma attached to conflict at work? And that's an interesting question, isn't it? What is it about having this disagreement that so many of us feel uncomfortable with or unsure about? Well, I guess it's there's a number of things going on here. If we look at the work of Patrick Lencioni, he looked at 5 dysfunctions of a team, and he developed a 5-level hierarchy. And the bottom rung of that hierarchy was that for a team to function well, the first thing that needs to be in place is trust, because the second level of his hierarchy was, without trust, we cannot have good conflict. So I think the negative stigma approach that's attached to conflict in the workplace may be something to do with that, in that if I enter into conflict, what will happen? What will they think of me? What will this mean to how they view me? Or how could this be career limiting? Am I going to stick my head over the parapet and get into trouble, or in some way sidelined as a response to this? So certainly when we think about managing upwards, challenging upwards, having a disagreement upwards, we may have some real concerns. I think with peers or even direct reports, conflict also is founded in this trust. So it's a case of, I'm concerned about standing up to this person, and it becomes fearful. And I think there's a lot of emotion attached to it as well. So I think that understanding that conflict can feel quite scary if the relationships between the parties isn't one based in trust. So the negative attachment to that is, conflict is a bad thing. Conflict will damage relationships. It will damage how people see you. It's not good. It means we're not getting on. And yet there is a huge amount of research that will tell you that conflict with what I call like a small c, so not like, fisticuffs conflict, but conflict with a small c, where we can disagree and have robust differences, is actually good. It's good for organizations. It means we make better decisions. It means people have thought more carefully. They've understood more deeply what's going on. They haven't just surface level agreed with what somebody else said, even though they perhaps have a concern there's a blinding error. So I think the negative stigma attached to conflict then in work is about us as people and the relationships with the people around us. It's about building trust to overcome that negativity. And I also think we have to accept that disagreement is good in many different ways. As we learn about people, we'll discover we're not all the same. So if you look at Tuckman's model of team development, he talks about this forming, and then there's a storming stage. And the storming is when people start sharing their own opinions, their own points of view, and that they may be different to other members of the team. However, that's okay. And I think it's an interesting thing to notice is different personalities will have more or less comfort with that okayness. So if you are perhaps more concerned with wanting everyone to get along, wanting everything to feel harmonious, wanting everyone to be happy, the idea of entering into conflict could be quite painful for you. Whereas the next person you're talking to goes, oh, I love a good argument for argument's sake. How do you know unless you get pushed a little and, you know, prodded a little? So when those two people could have a discussion, the one who likes conflict or disagreement may well come out going, oh, that was good, really felt that was great. But the person who feels uncomfortable with conflict may well come out of that discussion going, that was terrible, and I feel really upset now, and I don't know what to say next time I see them. So we can have different perspectives on this sense of disagreement. When that is acknowledged, we can see why it's so complicated to be able to have conflict in the workplace. We've got differing personality types, we've got different agendas, we've got different perspectives, we've got different language in terms of jargon or expertise or knowledge levels, education levels. It's really easy to see how conflict can get a bad name. So the next question that they've posed for me was, how can it be used as fuel to strengthen a team? And this is, I think, a great one, because I do believe conflict with a small c is good. And actually, I mentioned research that's been done over the years that reinforces that more diverse teams who have somebody who is a challenger and a questioner, end up producing better quality output. And that's what we want. But we need to make sure that everyone can get to a point where they're okay with those disagreement conversations. And that for me is where the topic of emotional intelligence will come in. And it may be something you're familiar with, but if you're not, you could certainly start with Daniel Goleman's work on it. And I think the reason I bring it here is because it requires a couple of things. First of all, my own self-awareness, that I know that I am agitated or defensive, or in some way you're pressing my buttons by challenging or bringing this conflict to me. But I'm also self-aware enough to recognize that that's an emotional reaction that may or may not be helpful. And perhaps I can regulate that a little bit. Emotional intelligence also includes, of course, some empathy. So what's the other person's perspective? What's their experience? And also, do I have the skills to manage their emotion in this discussion? Because sometimes other people's emotions can feel quite big when we're disagreeing, when we're having conflict. So I think emotional intelligence certainly sits at the core of developing ourselves and our team's abilities to manage conflict. I also think we shouldn't ignore the need for our own resilience. You know, we've got to acknowledge that there are days when we will not be ready or able, you know, to deal with the challenge. And so managing our own battery levels of resilience is also key. And I think this idea of perspective, you know, my perspective, your perspective, how we approach these elements, how much I feel a need. If we look at the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument, he talks about our approach to conflict being based on two things. One being the extent to which I am able to assert myself, and the other one being the extent to which I can offer support to the other person. So how supportive am I, and how assertive am I? And I think that perspective piece is really key. To what extent do I need to win this? And to what extent am I really paying attention to the other person's perspective? I guess in all of this, though, for me, it's about the relationships, isn't it? It's got to be about that trust. Do we have that connection? Do we feel that supportive role from the person across from us? So it's such an interesting topic. And the key questions there, where does it come from? Fundamentally, it's disagreement of some sort, and that can be at a task transactional level, and it could be at a personal values held level. Both of those things are valid, but one will feel more uncomfortable and more significant than another. The negative stigma, I think, comes from fear. We are afraid and perhaps not feeling fully safe in our current environments. And I think that's not surprising. You know, one of the concepts that I find really interesting about at the moment is this idea of fragile trust. So actually, what I'm here, am I advocating, well, we should be as trusting as possible in our relationships. And yet, given the last 2 years, the lack of informal social connection around some of these more tense meetings perhaps has been missing. And so we're not quite sure, are we okay? Did that come across as well? Did you walk away and then start bad mouthing me? Am I getting paranoid? Oh my God. So all of those things are playing into the fragility of trust is, I think, adding to the sense of negativity. But I do believe that it has strength to really help a team grow and produce better outcomes. So having an emotionally intelligent, resilient, supportive, trusting relationship with the people that you work with and that you come up against is really going to help. So good luck with that. And thank you.